She does not part with it, does not unsheath it unless absolutely necessary, and when she does, an immense amount of power can be drawn from it, enough to challenge even the gods themselves. At this point, I'm sure most of you have noticed the sword Acheron carries on her person, a weapon she is hardly seen without that was forged through endless bloodshed and battle. What you may not know is that her weapon is one of many. In fact, there are 12 of them. What exactly are these swords? Why were they forged? And what abilities do each of them have? That is what we'll be exploring in this video. The 12 edict edges of Izumo. Before we do though, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Now, to talk about the swords of Izumo, you need to understand how and why they were forged, and this relates to Izumo's history. I've actually covered this in a lot more detail in another video, but if you're not interested in watching that first, I'll give you a crash course. The planet where these swords were forged, Izumo, was one that had a sister planet known as Takamagahara orbiting near it. On Takamagahara, there were beings known as the yaoyorozu no kami who would every so often descend on Izumo to hunt and kill humans. These beings were largely uninterested in conquering or controlling Izumo or its people and only focused on the annihilation of its inhabitants. In order to survive, the people of Izumo fought back, and through great effort and sacrifice, they managed to kill off one of the yaoyorozu kami, the one referred to as the Sovereign of Revelation. Now what's unique about these creatures is that within their bodies was ingrained powerful mystical abilities. Each of the kami presumably had abilities that could functionally bend reality itself, though not much else is known about them. The master craftsmen of Izumo somehow managed to extract these abilities from their very bodies and forge them into blades called the edict edges. Each blade housed a power of one of the kami of the yaoyorozu, and the wielders of these swords could call upon their powers by simply reciting a mantra. Functionally, the swords gave the power of the gods to the very humans, and were forged to give the humans of Izumo a fighting chance against the yaoyorozu. Now in total, there were about 12 blades that were forged, and you can be sure we're gonna talk about all of them and their abilities, so strap yourselves in. The first one ever forged was done so using the body of the Sovereign of Revelation. The blade was named Truth, and it had the ability to allow mortals to comprehend all laws and order, to dissect all things, and to recreate miracles. Now if you haven't realized that, that's a whole lot of ambiguous and potentially reality-shattering powers packed into a single weapon. The ability to dissect all things, recreate miracles, those sound absolutely insane and can be wildly unbalanced. How were the Izumo humans even able to kill these things in the first place if these were their original powers? These seem like really crazy powers for a mere human to wield, especially since you just had to chant a mantra to access them. Of course, we don't know the details or the inner workings of how these blades actually function, but the payoff seems to benefit the user greatly with little to no downsides. Well, except for one thing. The blades unfortunately had the side effect of converting its users into Oni, and while they were originally considered as heroes, over time the people of Izumo came to fear them. While the abilities of Truth are indeed otherworldly, it only gets crazier from here. The second blade to be forged is the Blade of Sky, formed from the body of the kami Eternal Zenith. The sword appears as a flowing blade of energy wrapped in strands of black cloth. When activated, Sky would allow its wielder to turn the sky itself into walls and fortresses that would act as barriers and obstacles that would impede the yaoyorozu. Yes, it made the sky itself turn into a giant wall. Wrap your heads around that one. It likely was used as a defensive tool to repel the advance of their enemies, but I do wonder why they didn't just wall up the entire enemy planet if it could achieve this feat already. Anyways, moving on to the third blade, Howl, which was formed from the kami Almighty Thunder. Howl appeared as a black blade wrapped around a purplish core. As you might have guessed, the blade allowed its wielder to summon lightning that can tear the sky asunder. This one seems pretty okay. Summoning thunder and lightning seems well within the wheelhouse of ability users in Star Rail. I mean, the previous two allowed for recreating miracles and changing the freaking sky, so wielding lightning seems reasonable. Blade number 4 is the Blade of Mist, forged from the body of Everbreath. The sword appears as a greenish turquoise blade with multiple other blades protruding from its crossguard in a wing-like pattern, which kinda reminds me of the Master Sword from Legend of Zelda for some reason. The blade had the ability to summon immense and powerful winds that were strong enough to break and shear the land itself. The gales summoned from this winged blade could blow continuously and endlessly until its wielder chose to stop them. As an offensive tool, it likely had a great amount of power, but mastery over the winds themselves probably had a lot of utility uses as well. Perhaps you could fly, and maybe even influence the weather to some degree. So far, the first two blades seem to break reality, and number 3 and number 4 seem to grant great elemental powers. So they seem kinda balanced, right? Well, blade number 5 is a combination of both those things. At number 5, we have Frost, forged from the kami called Heaven's Winter Cloak and appears as a blade of pure ice. Given its name and appearance, you might have guessed that it allowed the wielder to summon ice and frost, and yes, it does indeed do that. But there's one more bonus feature for this particular sword. Much like S-Death from Akame ga Kill, this blade can indeed freeze most things, one of which is time itself. That's right, it can freeze time, stretching one moment out into an eternity. It's actually pretty on brand given ice powers in popular media can sometimes be related to freezing or stopping time, but again, it's something that functionally breaks reality. I doubt that there are many who can stand against time-stopping abilities and makes this blade one of the more stronger ones so far. Unless of course the miracle one just completely overrides this or something. Anyways, moving on. At number 6 is the sword Fate. Now Fate is pretty unique, even amongst some of these other swords, as it's functionally two swords in one. It represents the cycle of life and death. In its life form, the blade appears as a sword formed of pure light, while in its death form, it's pure black in appearance with a red crossguard. Now the description is kinda lacking as all it says is that it has the ability to make flowers bloom and cover barren graves. From that alone, it just sounds like a weapon Freedom would like. But I think that this is just an example of its application, with its true ability being able to grant and take life away. Now, this seems rather broken as hell, since you wouldn't need to swing the sword if it can just cause unconditional death. But I'm guessing that perhaps in order to activate that ability, you would first need to grant life to something before being able to take it away, or vice versa. So in combat, maybe the wielder would take life away from their enemies and instead grant them to their allies, but that's just my guess. At number 7 is the blade Flare, forged from the kami Flamebringer. Similar to most blades that have fire abilities, Flare is constantly shrouded by a bright orange flame with a black hilt and crossguard. Much like the other elemental swords on this list, Flare allows the user to summon extremely intense flames that are hot enough to char the sky and earth itself. Beyond that, not much else to really speak about it. It burns people. Blade number 8 is aptly named the Blade of Thought, forged from the leftover remains of the Wisdom Supreme and has a rather unique appearance. The blade itself appears shattered and in pieces, though still holding the outline that one would expect from a typical sword. Thought seemingly allows its user to discern past and future events through the use of any body of water. I'd imagine it being similar to divination, with the water surface functioning sort of as a medium. I'm not sure how valuable such an ability is in the midst of battle, though prior to one, you could probably use it to see all possible outcomes and ensure you take the path to victory. It's also likely used to set up and plan strategies to fight against the yaoyorozu since you can functionally see the future. Blade number 9 is called Groot. No wait, Root. It appears interestingly like a great sword from Monster Hunter and is made from what seems to be solid stone. Root seems to be the earth elemental sword in this lineup as it allows the user to command islands to float and for mountains and valleys to burst before your adversaries. I'm not entirely sure here, and I'm not a scientist, but I'm willing to bet that most living beings can't survive having an entire island or even mountains dropped on them. Like, what if I considered Australia as an island? Could I just drop continents on enemies? It seems that after the time-stopping ice sword, this one seems like a pretty close second, at least in terms of offensive powers for the elemental blades. And number 10 is the blade called Form. This one is something that the Harmony would very much like to get their hands on. It allows its user to forcibly make the masses join in unity and to make them ebb and flow as one. I don't know what that exactly means, but it sounds to me like some mass hypnosis ability that can subtly influence others to follow your commands. It doesn't really state what the range of influence is though, and whether there's an upper limit to how many it can influence, but given the craziness of the other swords so far, I'm willing to bet you can hypnotize at least half the planet. We are getting close to the end now, so just bear with me a little longer. Sword number 11 appears as a katana with many chains holding it to the ground and is aptly named Bind. Now you would think that its ability, given its name, is to bind people, right? Well, you wouldn't be entirely correct, and why many who face this blade eventually fall to it. The blade is mentioned to be able to drive misfortune into a cage, and demons and evil beings would instantly perish. I don't even know what this would even look like, and it seems the lower on this list we go, the more abstract some of these abilities become. But if I had to warrant a guess, the way it's described makes me think it's a giant cage pulling people into it, and those it deems as evil will immediately be destroyed. So maybe if you consider being in a cage as being bound, then I guess the name sort of makes sense. Finally, we reach sword number 12, the Maw. The Maw appears as a gnarly black-bladed sword with unstable purple energies emanating from it. The blade is able to corrode and age the world itself. I imagine that anything you cut with it will immediately start aging and corroding, and a single touch is more than enough to ensure death. It also has a secondary ability which, from the way it's described, seems to be able to equalize the strength of both Oni and Kami alike by intertwining their souls. Again, I'm not sure what this vague description really means, but I imagine those linked to this sword would have their power levels forcibly set to be the same. So a wielder that is weaker than their enemy can immediately level the playing field and functionally be given a winning chance. And with that, we have covered all 12 of the edict edges. Well, not really. You see, while originally there were 12 blades, even as a group, these 12 reality and world-ending blades were not enough to utterly defeat the yaoyorozu. Because of this, the 12 blades were reforged into a final two, origin and end. Now the wielders of these final two were presumably tasked with ending the war with the yaoyorozu, but for some unknown reason, they instead fought each other. My personal guess is it was due to a disagreement on how to best approach their task, but nevertheless, this duel led to one of them dying. After this event, like any anime final form, the blades were reforged one final time into the blade knot. This is the blade that we see Acheron carry in the current story. Now we don't functionally know what the abilities are for these three final blades, but for the last one that Acheron uses, she mentions that she is able to recall all the memories of her past when she unsheathes it. Whether this means she can call upon decades of battle experience and strength, or it allows her access to all other 12 abilities, we don't really know. But in the story, just by unsheathing this final blade, she was able to completely nullify Aventurin's abilities, so it must be something of immense power. To sum this all up, the edict edges were crafted purely to push back the yaoyorozu no Kami. While they had some success with this, the people of Izumo never really defeated the yaoyorozu. By the end though, no amount of power could stop nature itself, and both Izumo and Takamagahara fell into the shadow of IX, ultimately ending all the lives of every creature on both planets. No Oni, humans, or yaoyorozu has survived, save for Acheron. And so, she wanders the universe forever carrying the legacy of her people, and each time she unsheathes it, she will be forced to remember her ultimate failure. Now before I close this video out, there is one important thing to mention. Each of the edict edges seem to have eerily similar descriptions and abilities to the Hershers of the Honkai Impact universe. I'm not sure whether this was done as an homage or callback to the other game, or it's an indication that the concept of Honkai exists within Star Rail as well. I mean, it's kinda in the name. But that's probably speculation best left for another video. But I thought to mention it here since it's a pretty interesting fact either way. That brings the video to an end. If you could choose one of these 15 blades, knowing that it doesn't come with Acheron, which one would you want for yourself? Let me know in the comments. If you had fun watching this video or learned something you'll never ever use again, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.